So I want to warmly welcome you everyone to Agile HR Communities Meetup. We have these meetups once a month, maybe every second month, where we have fantastic guests who are learning about agility or have been learning about agility and done something which is of value to share to the bigger community. And I'm very, very proud to see what people are doing with what we teach them and with the agile and design thinking practices. You can really turn around an HR team to be future focused, customer focused, and truly bring value to the organization and the business with what we know agility can bring. I am super excited. I've been following what's going on at Netflix Talent for a while. It is so fantastic to learn from them what they're doing, and now they are here to present and practically give us tips and tricks and hints of how we can start moving towards an agile model. We are so glad to have you, Juleah, with us. So just a couple of words about me. So I'm the founder of Agile HR Community. My name is Riina. I have been working in HR for forever. I'm not going to even say how long, and then worked with agility for about 12 years. I'm going to be a facilitator, a host today, also interviewing Juleah a bit, but the main focus and the stage is with Juleah. And please, Juleah, could you please introduce yourself to everyone on the call? We are so glad to have you. You're so warmly welcome.
Hi, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. I see that we have folks from all over the world. My name is Juleah Zoppo, pronoun she, her, hers. I've been at Netflix for about 4 years and I've had a variety of roles across the HR discipline. And I'm currently one of our directors of our learning and organizational development team. And I'm here just to tell our story. We're about a year in. So I'm Riina, pass it over to you unless you want me to continue.
Thank you very much. It's so great to have you here. So how this is going to work, I'm just setting the context for today. Juleah is taking us through a story, and she will be sharing the story of how her team have gone into an agile operating model, how they're doing it, what they're doing, and sharing what the successes were there. I'm going to stop at some points with Juleah to have a couple of questions, interview Juleah a bit so that we can deepen the learning there. If you have any questions as a participant, you can pop your questions into the chat. I won't be following it while we have a conversation with Juleah, but afterwards we might pick up 1 or 2 or 3 questions and answer those. So Stefan, our fantastic colleague, will pick them up from the chat and make sure that I have them in front of me when we have time for some questions. But that said, the stage is yours, Juleah. Would be lovely to start hearing about your journey.
Thanks, Riina. So I'm going to share my screen and just to help talk through my narrative. And as a reminder, we're about a year into our journey with Agile HR. So the most important thing to set the stage is, what is it like working at Netflix? And what we like to say is at Netflix, it's really about working on hard, complex problems, but you get to do this, what we call stunning colleagues. And it's folks who are amazing at their craft, who are innovative, and who are just so talented. And what's unique within Netflix is, and depending how much familiar you are with our culture, if you aren't, we have our culture memo published on our website. But we really have this culture of freedom and responsibility. And what this means when we think about working at Netflix on complex problems and also with stunning colleagues is that how we actually approach and solve our problems is really up to us individually within our culture of freedom and responsibility. And so just to set the stage a little bit more, a year ago, I was charged with building Netflix's first ever global learning design team. So we were a decentralized organization. Netflix has been moving towards more global central teams when it comes to HR. And we've started to do that within the learning and organizational team. So thinking about, okay, here I am with how do I actually want to build this team, knowing that our task will be to build global learning solutions for the company. And I am someone who always tries to get inspired by disciplines outside of the HR field. And Netflix started being a technology company. Now we also are an entertainment company. And I started to poke my head into understanding with our engineering, our what we call product organization, I've heard of this thing called Agile, and I know that it's all about creating and designing for the consumer in mind. And knowing that what my team will be doing is creating solutions for our employees, so those would be our consumers, there's something there that I wanted to poke my head in. And that is where it was, destiny or fate, whatever you want to call it, but I stumbled upon the Agile HR book that really took the concept of working in an agile methodology and also design thinking, but with the HR lens. And that is exactly what I was looking to do at this point in time in my role. And so I will walk through my journey of picking up that book and getting inspired and saying, how do we actually turn this philosophy and this way of working and actually turn it into practice in an environment like Netflix that really never had this before within the HR space. So I'll share some graphs that might be familiar depending on if you've done any of the trainings or familiar with the book. But in thinking about where Netflix is as an organization. So Netflix is, first and foremost, the mindset of the company is really about a learning organization. So we like to say that we want to fail fast and fail forward. So what is it that we can try, take risks on, and learn? And this is really important when you think about standing up agile workflows and using design thinking methodologies, is wanting to make sure you have a mindset of the organization that allows you to learn and iterate and grow. And then the second thing in looking at the Netflix environment in which I was working in is, what are the values and principles that are in place or are not in place to help cultivate an agile methodology? And really, the roadmap was there. If you do read the Netflix culture memo, our culture speaks to innovation as one of our key values, and being able to try new things and give feedback. And there was the right values and principles, I would say, that we had in our environment. But what was missing for me within the HR space, and specifically within the learning and organizational development team, was we did not have the practices, tools, and processes in place because the team I was building was yet to exist. And so that actually was my opportunity to say, do I want to adopt what most organizations do, or what I've done in my past HR life, I would say, in other companies around building this global learning design team that adopted traditional ways of working? Or did I actually want to lean into Agile and adopt some design thinking methodologies and Agile workflows to really reinvent how we actually want to design our global learning solutions for a company like Netflix? So that red circle for me has felt like where I actually had the freedom to play, and I was supported by the other two outer circles across the culture and the organization that Netflix was and still is today. So what was it that I was working with from a traditional mindset to where was it that I wanted to go? And just to let everyone know, I'm not a designer, so this is my prototype. So I'm going to use that language of bear with me in the prototype of the graphics I'm using. But really, it was the current way of working for any project really at Netflix. And if we know about the waterfall approach, that was anywhere from understanding our priority set all the way through deploying and implementing. Maybe it takes 6 months to a full year to roll something out to the organization. How did I want to break that apart and move in a forward direction to the future around combining agile and design thinking workflows to say, if we were to do more of an iterative design process, do we actually think we could match the needs of the business at the fast pace that Netflix likes to operate in? So that was where I was headed. So just to give a glimpse of, well, what was the key for us to get there? There's really 4, I would say, keys to our success. The first one was I needed to build an operating model as a team that really adopted design thinking and agile development workflows. And so, what does this mean? It means thinking about, okay, how is it that we want to design and come up with the solutions, the products, if I'll use that language, the products, and then what type of workflow do we need to build it that actually allowed us to move quickly, learn as we're developing, and seek feedback from our key employees, our key users, I would say, throughout that process. And so I actually built an operating model in thinking about, okay, what is it from the design stage? And then what is it from actually developing in a 2-week sprint? And then how do we seek feedback and do user testing along the way? So we built that and we documented that, which I'll show a little bit of what a life cycle of a project looks like. And then the second thing is, how do I then fill all of the roles in order to operate that team operating model? And so I then created job descriptions and roles and responsibilities that mapped to the agile workflows and the operating model. So an example of this is I truly carved out key designers, so product designers, to design our solutions. I carved out key project operations team. So thinking about who's going to be the lead of the project, who's going to be tracking and be scheduling all of our design sprints, and who's responsible for the user testing. And it really helped us get clear of looking at Agile and saying, well, who's our product owner and who's our design team and who are going to be our actual project operations folks. And so I built job descriptions for each of these roles that really helped bring our operating model to life. And then the third thing is I had to hire people. I had to fill these roles. I couldn't just, I can't be every single role myself. And so I ended up hiring a team that either had Agile experience from, other organizations who are starting to use Agile and design thinking methodologies, or who had a high learning agility to actually learn and break away from their old way of doing things and adopt this new language and this new way of working. And then the last key to our success, which I think is so important if you think about the products that my team builds, is really about making sure that we have an engaged employee population to co-design our products. And Netflix has, as I mentioned earlier, stunning colleagues who really want to be a part of what is it that they're going to be able to receive as employees at Netflix. And whether it's learning experiences or learning content, they're invested in making themselves and each other better. And we have feedback culture is something that we try to have really strong at Netflix. And it was an opportunity to have employees give their feedback and be part of that co-design process. So in a highest level, I would say if I had to distill it down, it's 4 areas of success. And I know we've been talking for a little bit, so just want to give a break and Riina, just see if any questions come up for you.
Awesome, thank you so much. I think what you're explaining here is super intriguing, because you could practically start from a green field, right? You didn't have the team, you started building, and you could bring this way of working in, and you even built. You said you leaned into Agile, you reinvented how to set up the team. So you set it up according to the Agile workflow, which is amazing from the scratch. You didn't start even to build any siloed approach, but you started to build it from the Agile approach. A couple of things that comes to my mind is, first of all, the time span of this. How quickly did you ramp this up? How long did it take before you got from having no team to having ramped up a team with doing design thinking, having them onboarded to Agile ways of working through training and through coaching, and really now independently doing that cycle? How long does it take?
So to break this down, so in March, I would say that was when I was charged with, okay, Juleah, go ahead and build this new team, and you just have to figure it out on your own. And so that was in March, and I ended up hiring our first team of designers and project operations around August, I would say. And then it was once I felt like I had someone at least in every role. So we had project managers, at least 1 or 2 designers, and then what I call my learning engagement manager, if you think of them as almost a project lead. Once we had that in order for at least one project, that was around September timeframe, we actually went after our first project. And that was in partnership with our inclusion team. And I had to play a couple different roles. I was leaning in as a learning engagement manager, and we were testing and iterating and saying, how does this work? So I would say, around anywhere from 3 months to 4 months into hiring, and then about 6 months to actually try and we knew we were going to be scrappy, and we knew we couldn't do everything. I would say it was a full 9 months before we have someone in every role on the team to be able to do multiple agile projects at the same time.
Right. So it takes a while, but you knew very clearly where you wanted to go, and that helped you fill the roles, helped you onboard people, helped you even choose people. And that's one of my questions, because you said hire a team who have high agile experience or high learning agility. How can you sort out from all the fantastic applicants you must have to your team? How can you pick up the diamonds who can really deliver through this way of working?
Yeah, so a couple things. So my team now consists of folks coming in from outside Netflix as well as from inside Netflix as well. And I would say when interviewing candidates, a couple of questions that I really like to ask. So the first is, what does the word scrappy mean to you? And depending on how people answer that question, some people get into scrappy could be progress over perfection, which is one of the principles that we like to have within agile and iterative design. Scrappy may be, okay, if I have lack of resources, does it force me to prioritize what I need to work on, which is another principle of agile, of making sure we're focusing on the most impactful parts of a solution. And then I like to also throw in some hypothetical questions around, if you were working on a project and let's say, a leader came in and gave you new context and it completely threw your project up in the air, what would you do? And then also questions that really go back to ruthlessly, I use this language all the time, ruthlessly prioritizing.
Yeah.
And then, so just a couple of those questions. And internally, I would say, seeing people who giving them an ambiguous problem and seeing how they actually come up with a solution, and how do they approach constraints, and how do they actually approach seeking feedback from the folks that they're designing for. And as context in the business changes, are they able to change their strategy as quickly as the business is changing? So those would be a couple of things that I look for.
Brilliant, brilliant. And I think also you have such a strong feedback culture, so you didn't have to check for that internally. That's practically checked already. If you work for Netflix, you are ingrained in how to give very clear, strong, immediate feedback about things. So you're also quite aware of how to receive that feedback. That's amazing. How about you? I realize that you didn't have anything that you had to let go of with your team, but if companies start moving or HR teams start moving this way, I've heard a lot of conversations with some customers that at some point they need to start letting go of the way they did things before, the way they made decisions, the way they discussed with users, the way they thought about their products. Was there anything like this that you had to leave something behind or let go of something when you moved towards this way of working and this operating model?
So I would say my best example is thinking about folks who came into Netflix new, and so they were used to more traditional ways of working. And the concept of the hypo, so highest paid person's opinion, is it an opinion or is it a directive? And how are folks on my team willing to approach that concept? And so that was something that I would say was a challenge to move away from. And then also this is, and part of this is thinking about within at least the learning space. Another thing was, I used it already, progress over perfection, where as designers, and even I think I would speak on behalf of myself as someone who my work shows itself, is wanting what I put out there and what my team puts out there to be the best representation of what they could do. And at what point in time is the additional work that we do on a specific feature, let's call it, of our solution, and how much is that from an impact versus effort? Mm-hmm. And is that incremental design effort actually going to have the impact we need? And the answer is probably no. And so that is a little bit of, when we think about to the traditional way of working of taking 6 months to a year on something, and the reality is, were we actually working on things of that solution that maybe we didn't even need it in the end. And so that was a little bit of a challenge in helping people get over that progress, progress over perfection instead of trying to be perfect in everything.
Oh, that's such a good saying, and that's easy to remember as well. If you see somebody kind of go into that perfectionism thinking, you can kind of nudge them to say, hey, progress is more important. Super, thank you. Let's hear some more of your story. I think that you've got a couple of things regarding your operating model and how you work. Would be lovely to hear that.
Yes. So to show a visual of, we've actually taken, and just to let you know, we actually had my whole entire team participated in Agile HR with Riina's team. And that was making sure that I'm giving them the right tools, resources, and language for us to adapt this operating model. And as we went in and just tried to work this way, we constantly relook at it and say what's working and what's not. But if I were to pull up at the highest level, this is a visual of our operating model, and I'll talk through it briefly. So what we do is actually, let's say that our business challenges that we want to solve for are clear for the year to start. Now we know moving into the year, they may change, but at least we say, okay, we have our backlog of projects. We're going to pull a project in. And at first, we actually do a discovery phase. And this is at Netflix, one of the most important questions that employees we need to ask ourselves is, what problem are we solving for? And then also when you think about the work that my team does, but for whom are we solving this problem for? And so we actually do some discovery phase work, about a 2-week sprint here, in really understanding the business challenge, our personas that we're designing for, and any of our key stakeholders that we need to keep informed, or we understand who's the hypo in this, who's the product owner of this, etc. And then we actually, once we have that about a 2-week time period, we actually stand up a design thinking sprint. And we try with us now, the pandemic starting to move on and people starting to be able to come into the office, we have identified actually within the design thinking sprint, what work can be done in person that's most effective and what work can actually be done virtually or even asynchronously that can also be effective with the design sprint. So we'll do the design sprint, and really it's the creative brainstorming stage to actually come up with a prototype of our solution. So we answer the question of, well, how might we solve what we've discovered in the discovery phase? And then once we have the prototype, we immediately get feedback from our key stakeholders, from the product owner, who is also part of the design sprint, and then also any of our persona folks. And then we move into, once we get feedback and tweak things, we move into our development stage, which is all about our 2-week design sprint. So we do a Monday morning stand-up. We have a digital Kanban board that we know what's on our backlog. We pull things into that 2-week sprint, and then we actually work really hard for those 2 weeks. We communicate asynchronously to give updates and share where we are in the progress. And then at the end of the 2 weeks, we do a Friday recap to share and review the work. And then also if we have a big milestone, it might be a demo of something that we've worked on. And then that's where the question I want my team to ask is, how do we ruthlessly prioritize what is needed to develop our prototype that we went forward with? And then as we develop the content, we have stages of user feedback. So we do a lot of user testing with our key population. And then when we're ready, we do an iterative release. And really the questions we're asking is, what is it that we learned? And then what else is needed? And sometimes it's tweaking, and sometimes, it might be maybe nothing is needed until we look at this, if it's something we want to look at every year. So we always end the project with, when is it that we want to relook at this to then put it on our backlog to design for something new? And so we never want to leave a project that is open-ended of like, oh, we got the feedback, and then we all know what happens. It just sits there on the shelf, and then it gets outdated, and then maybe we retire it in a year, and it's not solving for what we needed to solve for. So, and then I want to pause there, Riina. Just any questions with the operating model?
So one thing that I want the people who are listening to this to see is how beautiful this is. It's beautiful, simple, talking about how to set up a very fantastic flow of work. This is global, a global team delivering globally products to your, how many employees now?
So we are a little bit over 10,000.
10,000 employees. So it's not a small company doing this. It's a large company and central team doing it through a fully agile model. A couple of things that comes to my mind is when teams start setting up their agile model, they don't have the right answer. They can't have the kind of blueprint up front, but they start with something and then they start tweaking what didn't work or improving to the next iteration, or maybe do, say that we have half a year, we'll work this way. In half a year, we'll look at our way of working and change what didn't work that well and tweak that. So I'm just curious about how many iterations have you done? Have you, redone the model often? Did you need to toss something and bring something in? How did this come alive?
Yeah, so we at Netflix, and this is part of our feedback culture, is even in the middle of a project, during our retros, we say what went well and what didn't go well. And those are the retros and the 2-week sprints. And we might be able to see where we might be running into each other, or maybe there was roles and responsibilities weren't clear, or maybe we actually went too fast in one of the stages. And what does that mean? And so that is more constant iteration. However, I have started to stand up a SWOT analysis with my team to look at our operating model. So it's where we go through an exercise and answer questions for the strengths, the weaknesses, any opportunities, and any threats to our way of working. And I actually do this SWOT conversation separately with our designers from the project operations team, because I wanted to understand there's the design aspect of it, and then there's the project operations kind of encompassing it. And I had high hopes that maybe we can do this quarterly. And I realized as I'm building the team, it does take time to pause and look. So we're doing this actually twice a year to start. I'd love it to be more frequent as this just becomes second nature. And we actually did this the beginning of this year. So when we were about, I would say, 6 months into this new operating model. And when we looked at the SWOT analysis, we then said, okay, what are the opportunities we want to chase? What are some of the weaknesses or threats that we want to mitigate? And then we actually ruthlessly prioritize what is going to be, the biggest impact of where we want to improve the operating model. And that's actually the number one thing we did, was the discovery phase. We actually realized we needed this before the project start, because we were realizing that once we jumped into the design thinking sprint, we didn't really have all of the answers for our personas, or we didn't maybe truly understand the constraints because we didn't go out and have conversations within the business, or let's say a focus group, or interview some of our stakeholders. So that was a new thing. And then the last, I would say, iteration is, and I saw the question in the chat of, for a design thinking sprint, it's actually not 2 weeks. We try to do it in one full day. If not, break it up into smaller half-day sessions. So it really would take just a couple of days to get to that prototype. And that is, we've realized, what part of that design thinking sprint is best to be in person versus asynchronous. And once we actually tested, we do a lot of A/B testing. Let's try it this way for this project, this way for that project. We actually realized we can really expedite that timeline to be within a couple days.
And that's amazing. That's amazing. Your team is going to be building skills that are rare in HR and people operations currently, when they get the routine of doing it this way, and also crystallizing design thinking in such a short time period. I guess that it takes a lot of preparations to do it properly in a day or two. So you are prepping that, and you've got the ops team probably sharing, scheduling, validations, etc. But that's brilliant. There's a question also in the chat that I might pick up now. Is your team members, are your team members full-time working on these projects?
Yes.
Yeah, so they're full-time in this model. They don't have any, this is the problem in many teams when we work with people operations, is that they've got their operational or kind of domain expertise work, where they work with some things that are ongoing, and additionally they go into agile projects and agile value deliveries. And that there's always that allocation conversation there. I tend to say I'm not coaching agile teams without at least having 50% of their allocation to the agile project, if it's a real agile team. That said, I have to also, let me ask you, Juleah, I mean, everybody do not have to go into a full agile model to be agile, to start bringing in agility, bringing in tools, the mindset, the way of handling, for example, customer centricity. Do you have any tips for that? Because you are now going all in for this. So any tips for people who say, oh, I can't do all of this, we can't possibly change our operating model? What would you say to them?
Yeah, I would say if you're curious to see how this may work, start small. And you can break all of this up into what you feel like is going to give you the most impact. So an example is just taking the design sprint. So there's, 6 stages, I would say, of the design sprint, and we do it all in, one day or break it up over 2 days and half days each. But it's thinking about, the work that we do. There's the ongoing work, let's say, and when I say we do, I'll just say in HR, an ongoing work. But then there's always going to be something new or something that you have to solve for that presents itself. And to challenge yourself, if you're interested in working this way, of saying, do we want to do a design thinking sprint to help us come to the question of like, how might we solve for that? And that's your prototype. And then that could be a good start. Then if you want to start, well, what does that look like? If you want to try to see what you can do in the 2-week increments, a key part of Agile is understanding the weight of each piece of that development. So you understand the true capacity. So will this take 50% of my time? Will this take 20% of my time? And choosing a project that might be small enough where you have to solve for it anyway. So it's where the work is there. But do you want to challenge yourself solving for it in a different way and budgeting that time to solve for that you have to budget anyways? So I would say it's just approaching piece of your work and committing to that way.
I love that. There's just one customer who said, who we're starting to work with, who's saying, we have this big thing on our CHRO's agenda that nobody has picked up because it's on nobody's agenda, really. It's in nobody's domain. It's in everybody's domain, but nobody's picking that up. And they now recognize that that's going to be their design sprint. They're just going to bring people from all of the HR domains, work with that for a week or 2, get that wrapped up as a prototype, get some feedback, and then they are actually so much ahead to understand what needs to be done with this project. Awesome. Let's move forward to be sure that we've got covering everything.
Yeah. So in thinking about, I know we were talking about the operating model. If I were to take a step back and think about, well, what has really been the benefits for this new way of working for our HR team in Netflix, but also for Netflix as a whole? And there's really, for me, 3 things. And so the first one is I truly have seen us be able to deliver incremental value that actually is meeting the needs of the business faster. And Netflix moves so quickly, and we are willing to pivot and change as the needs of the business change. And how do we, within my team, how do we keep pace with that? And so this way of working has allowed us to be able to do that. The second thing is it really has allowed us to fail quickly and learn what works and what doesn't, and then iterate upon it. And then the last is that in looking at the products my team has designed, I do think that we've been able to more thoughtfully design relevant products and solutions. And a key to that is the co-design process with our employees in the discovery phase, really seeking to understand and empathizing with our employees and what is it that we're trying to solve for and alleviate or support them in. And then also that user testing. We actually get to test some of our features and some of the elements of our products before we actually roll it out and feel assured that what we're putting out is relevant for them. So I was talking to Riina and we're saying, okay, it's great just to talk about this, but what's an example of you actually went forward with this new way of working and use this to be able to create something for Netflix? And so I will just quickly show an example of what we did, and it was within 1 quarter of work. So we're talking about 3 months here was our timestamp. So the case study I'll talk through is all about reigniting our culture of feedback. So as I mentioned earlier, Netflix, we really pride ourselves in having a strong feedback culture. And we've actually looked over the last couple of years and realized, okay, we've doubled as a company. We have been through a global pandemic, and we actually have grown in employee population across the globe. And we realized that our culture of feedback has started to become a little bit challenged and diluted in some areas of the company just because of those factors. And so we in HR said, okay, well, how do we reignite our culture of feedback? I mean, that is like the most ambiguous question that, we can think of. And so it's really about that complex problem to solve. And remember, I have stunning colleagues to solve this problem. And so how do we actually go about this? Like, that was it. How do you reignite our culture of feedback? So we broke it down to first of what's the business challenge? And we got really clear on the business challenge, which was we believe that there was a gap in Netflix's aspired culture of feedback and the actual application of the behavior, skills, mindsets required to actually realize this culture, to really show up in the way that we wanted to from a feedback culture. And then, so that was the business challenge, and we went through the canvas and we understood the constraints of everything when it talks about our feedback culture. And then within my team, we got really crisp on, well, what's the problem statement we need to design around? And the problem statement was, how might we design a learning strategy that cultivates the right environment, behaviors, skills and mindsets for leaders and all employees in order to reignite our culture of feedback. So this was a higher level problem statement because we really wanted to build a learning strategy. We felt like one product was actually not going to help solve for that business challenge. So what was our learning strategy? And then we knew within the learning strategy, we would have a couple of key products that would help get to the moment that matters in living up to closing this gap between our aspired culture of feedback and the actual culture of feedback. And so to share with you what was our learning strategy, for us, it was all about reigniting the basics. And how did we decide to reignite the basics is really, we decided to go for two things. The first was, and this was the product ended up being an interactive feedback toolkit, but we really wanted to help employees. And we have a 360 feedback cycle, which is where you can give and receive feedback from anyone in the company. And we do this in an annual basis. It's just to help to remind people to give feedback. It's not performance review by any means. And so what we wanted to help, we had all this like feedback learning content and all these Google Docs and all of these resources, but we realized that, well, that content wasn't really practical and was not engaging. And it actually did not help cultivate the right environment, behaviors, and skills for leaders and employees during the 360 cycle or beyond. So how do we do that? And our product that we prototyped was a interactive feedback toolkit. And the second was, we actually wanted to strengthen skills of feedback, but for us it was, well, how do we scale live feedback capability? We're a global company now, and we have over 10,000 employees. About, I think it was 40% of the company has yet to go through the 360 cycle, so they haven't even experienced a full year of feedback at Netflix. And so we realized that we needed to build a feedback workshop that really allowed us to strengthen feedback that's specific, actionable, and candid to support them during the cycle, but also beyond, because we want to have continuous feedback culture. So to give you a sense of what is it that we were able to create in the 3 months, the first is, what was this live feedback workshop? And we actually, it was all about making it practical. And it was all about feedback in action. So we brought in, it is an organization that actually has professional actors where we put people in the hot seat, and we actually had them role play real scenarios of feedback that felt real at Netflix. And so we actually co-facilitated these workshops. They're about 2 hours. We did it all over Zoom. I think we had about over half of the organization was able to engage in one way or the other. And we used the real life scenarios, and we were able to, in this time frame, localize in the 4 languages. This was one of the first products. We realized that localizing in 4 languages across Netflix really allowed us to live up to building feedback capability, because we know there's some languages that they don't even have a word for feedback. And so how do we expect those employees to engage in our culture of feedback if they don't even have the word for feedback in their own local language? So we really realized that in order to make this practical, we empathize with our users and realize in some countries, the learning, I would say the learning piece was really affected by what language the learning content was in. And then switching to just show you some of the interactive feedback toolkit. And this is a credit to my designers are amazing. I keep reminding them progress over perfection. They still come up with this highly engaging feedback toolkit that basically broke our learning management system. We recoded it. We really challenged ourselves to be creative. And it was because what we prototyped, we realized the system didn't exist, but how can we fit the system to what we prototyped? And we were able to do that. And it really is engaging and it's intuitive. We did a lot of user testing, and part of this was to highlight the learning content that was just in time to meet our employees if they were going to have a feedback conversation then, or if you're a leader, how do you cultivate the right environment for feedback? So this is a toolkit. And then the last kind of piece of the product that we built was really coming from empathizing with our users that there was a lot of anxiety and stress when it comes to engaging in a culture of feedback because it's not always organic in a corporate environment. And so how do we actually lower the bar of the intensity of feedback and have some fun with it and also be practical? And so we actually came up with a feedback quiz. And before I show you a quick video of it, of actually being adapted from personality assessments, and there's a lot of behavioral science out there, is through questioning, we were able to categorize people in giving and receiving feedback into, call it personality buckets, that really highlighted if someone wanted to become more self-aware of, well, how do you like to give and receive feedback? Or if I wanted to learn about a colleague and I could guess what their personality was, how do I actually engage with them and how they like to receive and give feedback? And so this just shows an example of the Netflix character quiz. So we are fan people of our own content over here. And so we had some fun. We have simple 10 questions and people could answer that. And in the end, it actually shows you what Netflix character, and this is an example of Stephanie here from senior year. And it's a fun way to actually learn real practical advice around how people like to give and receive feedback differently based on behavioral science. And it was just a fun way for us to lower the bar of anxiety when it comes to our feedback culture. So, Riina, I can talk about my biggest takeaways, but didn't know if you want me to, I'll do there and then we can turn it over for questions after.
Fantastic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. So the biggest takeaways I'll say is, for me, it's all about ruthlessly prioritizing what you need to build first and staying true to that. And two, making sure that, my team is empathizing with our personas and really understanding what is it we're solving for and for whom. And then testing and iterating quickly so we actually can get some validation and quick feedback if what we're building is actually going to be relevant and helping solve for what the business needs to solve for. And I can stop sharing my screen.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I am just beyond words. This is the first time I saw that prototype or that product of feedback, and 3 months in global, all of that done. Just amazing. Well done. Congratulations. I would just, if I think about me being a HR leader or a HRD person, and I really want to start working this way, it sounds like a lot of effort and work goes into every product. How do you kind of make the business case for the effort, for the investment in time of this product development in this way, rather than just one person that owns the product going back and kind of designing it and saying this is how we do feedback from now on, because you've now worked with a team, you've involved people from your organization, etc. So there's a lot of effort going into that, but then what comes out is usually very, very good and people love to use it. So how do you make the case when you start working this way?
Gosh, the root, I would say, case of what I always have used is we are now a global organization. And my biggest concern is having an individual who would be responsible from, design all the way through creation and thinking about designing with their own biases and their own lived experiences. And in order to make sure that we're designing for the global population and understanding what that looks like in Korea versus in Brazil, that in order to do that, we actually have to expand the group who actually helps design and give feedback and input into the products that we create, which then breaks down the purpose of having one person do that. And so how do we actually design with a global mindset in mind by making it part of the actual operating model and design process? So that's one of them. And the other thing is, I would say that it allows us to, and this was just one example, but I don't have the whole team just working on this. We can actually accomplish a couple different agile projects depending on the size of the actual project, and have the team working in different pods, because we all know people have different skill sets and experiences, and bringing in different stakeholders depending on what that business challenge is. We're actually to have different projects running simultaneously to be able to do more in a shorter period of time.
And this is what we talk about when we talk about portfolio management, is how to make sure that there is a portfolio work that fills your capacity in a healthy way, that you can get out what we call releases to the organization. And that's one thing that I want to ask. And there's a question from the audience. Release planning. It's very different from digital products, where you can practically release a new website or a new feature with a push release to all of the users, or even a pull release where the user is pulling that in. But when we talk about releases in HR, we have to be very mindful of what can we release, how much effort is a release. Usually we need to train people, communicate, etc. Can you talk about how you make decisions about what to release? What's the chunk that you release out to the users, or are you building several chunks and then have that aggregated in a release?
Yeah, it depends on what it is we're solving for. So an example is we actually used Agile and design thinking to relook at our 360 feedback cycle. So it's the actual process of the 360 feedback. I showed you just the learning strategy, but how do we want to redo the 360 process based on what we learned in 2021? And so we actually did a design thinking sprint, and then we did the prototyping feedback, and then we rebuilt the process. And that was something we knew that because it's an annual process, the release will be annual. And that may dictate when we actually go back and learn and iterate it on, but we can plan for that in our portfolio, knowing it's going to be cyclical in what we want to look at that versus if it's something like, let's call it onboarding. So we know that we can help scale and strengthen the onboarding experience at Netflix. We've identified what is it that the key moments that matter that we can improve now. And then we have actually the backlog. So we prototyped a whole new thing. We have the backlog of the other additional features that we want to accomplish within onboarding that we will hold. And it might be every quarter we release something and we give an update to hiring managers. So we actually decide that on the front end once we get to our prototype develop what features we're going to do first and what features go on the backlog for when we do another iteration.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. So there's a proper conversation about what you will release, even already in the beginning, before you start, when you got that prototype. There's a question about how do you interact with other parts of the people function that are not organized in an agile way. Do you see the tensions? Do you see that they're curious? Do you see that they've got a totally different cycle time with delivering something and you have to wait for a lot? What's happening there?
So it's really interesting because at Netflix we and the word scrappy is true, and we get really smart people on hard problems that work together and figure it out. And we there's not a project management way of working, as I mentioned, that Netflix has adopted. So it's really go off and build it and people will figure out how to do it. And so I would say that what we've learned is as we partner with other parts of the HR organization, they're kind of poking their heads in and they're like, hang on a second. How did you get there so quickly? And you really can speak on behalf of, the new hires, for example, for the onboarding redesign. And what we've actually done is my team has actually started to partner with other parts of HR in facilitating a design thinking sprint for them in a problem that they're solving for that maybe they would have spent 3 months trying to figure out, and they're able to accomplish that in a couple of days. And so there's a huge appetite to actually move into an agile way of working across the other parts of HR to start to use the same language, because people have started to, we've been vocal about what we're trying to do within our team. And we have actually, I believe it's this week, we're kicking off a next round of Agile HR training. We have about 35 people across our Netflix talent team who want to understand what this looks like to build their own operating model adapted from what we are trying in Netflix.
And I think if I may interpret a little bit what I've seen is that your organization is so flexible, so fast, so reactive already, that you might not have the trouble that a traditional organization have where an agile team starts working and they've got dependencies, then they're not getting into their agendas even in 2 months, right? So you probably don't have this, as you showed the onion picture in the beginning, where you said, we've got the culture, we've got the reactivity, we've got this mindset. Now we needed the structure, the practices, the operating models. And that's what is really bringing now the structure to how to deliver. Fantastic. Thank you so much. I've got one more question that I think is important for us, because sometimes when you develop these products, you've got so many different requirements and so many great ideas and so many personas that need this and that from you. But in the end of the day, you have to make decisions. This is what is in our product. This is not going to be in that, it's out or it's coming later. And when we talk about a role called the product owner for agile people, all of those who went to our training know what a product owner is. And I think that product owners are going to be very important in HR moving forward. It's not a process owner. It's not a decision maker. It's not a manager. It's somebody who knows what the customers and users need, and it's the voice kind of combining stakeholder needs, customer needs, and trying to boil that down into a backlog. This is what we need to build, and also making decisions on what not to. Can you just share some of your thoughts regarding that product owner role?
Yeah, it became crisp really early on in us trying this way of working that we needed to make sure that we had true product owners for our products that really were leading the strategy for the products that ours fit into. And so our team has been hiring even outside of my team. And there's one example where we yet didn't have a role for leadership development, who was going to be a product owner for some of our leadership development initiatives we were doing. That role wasn't filled yet. And so we had one of my learning engagement managers, who's the project lead, playing product owner. And it really was challenging because you have, she was being biased by leading the project, but she wasn't what we call like informed captain of the leadership development strategy yet. Mm-hmm. So she was having to make these decisions. And so going from that, it's very clear. And we've actually recently reshuffled things within learning and organizational development to separate our product owners for leadership products and all employee products. Ooh, good. And my team actually sits underneath as design. And now we're looking at what delivery and operations and measurement looks like. And that means we have, 2 teams for leadership and all employee, and product owners that come and join my team in the project, and they're the clear decision maker. Mm-hmm. Now, the watch out there, I would say, is if your product owner is not familiar with Agile, they may want to solve for so many different things. And it might be, and my team's taking this on to give feedback to that product owner to say, help us understand, how do we ruthlessly prioritize? Do we go after this now? Or what's the benefit if we don't? And then we actually get to go after it next quarter. And so it's a little bit of us also providing feedback and training for how the product owners can be most effective in the way that we believe works best for Netflix.
Fantastic to hear. So your team is practically helping a product owner succeed in their work so they can help them succeed with the product. Amazing. I want to say a huge, massive thank you, Juleah. It's been amazing to have you here. You are, when we spoke about this case, tears started falling down my face because I was so taken of what you've done with agility. It is an amazing, globally top-notch case, and I'm so glad that you were here to share that with our community. I am sure that people are appreciating this a lot, and it will be a hit in YouTube when people are learning about Agile HR. A massive thank you to you, Juleah. And we will be sharing the story in Norway as well in a conference soon. So hopefully we can see some of you in Norway as well. Thank you so much, Juleah. Anything you want to say to the community before we...
Well, thank you, Riina, for inviting me. And I would say that if you're interested, just try it. And if it doesn't work out, learn why it didn't and just go from there.
That was a great ending for this. Thank you so much. Have a fantastic day, everyone. Juleah, let's keep in touch. Awesome to have you here. Ciao.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.